This one will be due March 18th. Is that right? That is right, yeah. This doesn't take this long for this one. We'll be learning how to track a camera versus what we've been doing before, which is tracking individual items inside of a scene. We're going to solve for the entire scene and then be able to put items wherever we want. Ideally, this is what you want to do if you can. Sometimes you can't do it, and sometimes you have to track just a piece. Sometimes it's simple enough where you can just track a piece. Sometimes you need stuff bigger, and you'll see what I mean. You'll be tracking in Nuke and After Effects. Some of you may not have ever tracked in After Effects, so I want you to see that. Some of you have never tracked in Nuke, obviously, so we will be doing that as well. So you'll have two turn-ins for this one. We'll be diagnosing a piece of footage. We'll be tracking a camera in After Effects, tracking a camera in Nuke, setting up the 3D workflow Nuke, and then using a variety of methods to place stuff, animation versus still, and then all your finishing touches you would typically put on stuff. Your turn-ins, your essentials, screenshot of your node graph and your movie from Nuke, and then your movie from After Effects. So you'll have two movies, one node graph. And your resolution is 1280 by 720. Okay, so that's in the book. I'm going to jump into After Effects just so you can see what this is going to kind of look like from the After Effects side. This is just text. I'm not concerned with you creating something super fantastic and spending hours designing something. But if you want to use this in your portfolio, that's where you really want to do that kind of thing, okay? I'm more concerned with this assignment that you can see the workflow of it versus spending hours and hours building this. Eventually, we'll take these skills into our next assignment, which is going to be a matte painting where we'll be using camera solving plus creating a piece of artwork for the background. So here you can see this camera is moving. There's a piece of text that's sitting on the ground, and then there's another piece of text that's like driving down the road. Okay, and you probably have seen these kinds of things in shows and movies. They've done this. It is the parking lot. This is drone footage that someone shot. So the video we'll be using is this DJI-0026A _1. It's going to be on Dropbox, so you'll use that. I'm going to go and make a new project. Oops, that's not a new project. I'm going to go to a new project. Yes, ma'am. All right, so I'm going to import that piece of footage, which is right under my Dropbox, this 2560 files, Winter 19, and green screen footage, and DJI. All right, this piece of footage is 3840 by 2160. People had an issue last time when they were using the footage that they didn't scale it down first, and so it took forever to do anything. We will scale this down to something that's more manageable. I'm going to drag this down to the new composition. I'm going to zoom out a bit. And this is also 1 minute and 15 seconds long. We don't want 1 minute and 15 seconds long. That's way too much time for us to be tracking and doing our stuff. We want to find a good clip that we would use of this thing. So I'm going to just skim through here, and I know where the good track is. It's right about, nope. See how the camera's kind of going up and down? It's kind of, we don't want that in our video, right here. Right there, okay. So right before it pushes forward, that's where I'm going to start it. So I'm going to hit B to say the beginning of where I want to start tracking. I'm going to go to the end of where I want to start tracking, which is shortly up here. Let's just say there, plenty of time. I'll hit N to set the end of that area. So B is the beginning, N is the end. That sets these two bars right here. Then I'm going to go to my composition and trim it. That shortens the composition. Now I'm going to go to my comp settings and change this to 1280 by 720. And then I'll set my start code back to 0 because I don't like it at that weird number. And then I just hit S to scale, and then I drag this down, I think, to about 33%. There we go. Perfect. Okay. So now this, it's actually 33.33%. There we go. Very specific. Cool. So now I'm going to go and use this piece of footage. Now I'm going to export this out so I have a clean version. Right now what we're doing is we've imported this piece of footage and we've scaled it down. After Effects is remembering you have this huge piece of footage has now been scaled down. It still has these other sides to it. So I'm going to actually export it out as a sequence and then bring it back in, okay? Now that's fine because when we go into Nuke, we're gonna use a sequence anyway. So I'm gonna go to File, Export, Add to Render Queue. Same stuff we did before, lossless, TIFF, hit OK, click here. This is gonna be drone footage, raw, drone footage. And oops, make sure you put the dot in there. Got that. Dot. And then we hit render. Okay, so this will give us our piece of footage that we can then delete all of this stuff and bring it back in, and we have a nice clean piece of footage with no extra stuff that's going to slow us down. I'm actually just going to hit stop because I already have the footage there. And I'm going to delete. And then just bring the footage in that I have. So that will be on my P drive here. I've already made my folders ahead of time. I don't need to go over that. You guys know how to do that. Camera tracking, drone from AE. There it is. Okay, so I click on the first piece. I make sure that TIFF sequence is clicked, and I hit import. Same way that we would do a movie that we're bringing in and going to render out. Now I drop this. Oops, I don't drop it down yet. I'm going to right click and go to Interpret Footage Main. My original footage was 29.997 or 97. I'm going to make sure it's set to that, and then I'm going to drop it down, and now everything should match. Cool. So there's my piece of footage that I have. Now the After Effects tracking is easy. If you had After Effects and you've done camera tracking, what do? Nothing. Crickets. We go to animation and you just pick that button. That's all we have to do. After Effects is super simple. Track camera, and we wait. Now this is shot with a GoPro. The GoPro's footage typically is going to be like distorted some, but because we're so far away from the stuff, it's not distorted, okay? So we don't have to worry about any distortion. If we were closer to things and we saw the items kind of rounding off, we would have to undistort it, which on the next assignment is what I will show, so you can see how to do that. So what this is doing, if you remember when we did our other tracking assignments, we would go and we would put a tracking marker, and then we would say track, and it would follow that tracking point from every frame. When we did a planar track, we would create a mask, and it would follow all those tracking points within that mask. What this is doing is it's going frame by frame by frame and sending tracking points all over the place. One of the downsides of After Effects is that it doesn't show us what those tracking points would look like. So we just have to click that button, wait for this thing to get done, and then hope for the best, and it should give us a good track. This piece of footage is pretty easy to track because there's not a whole lot of crazy stuff happening. Just like our other tracks, if we had reflections, if we had transparency, if we had water on the ground, all of those things could make it not be a good track. Also, if we had a moving object in this shot, it wouldn't work too, because that moving object, After Effects would think is part of a static camera. So luckily there is no moving objects. Luckily it's a pretty straightforward track on here, and it's taking a lot longer than it should be taking. A couple things that we could play with once we're done. Under the Advanced tab, we may need to do a detailed analysis. I didn't when I originally did it, but that doesn't mean anything when we actually bring it into the classroom. We may also need to play with the track size or the target size and just adjust those and then try it again. In here, I literally, when I did this one, I just clicked it and then it worked, okay? If we're trying to get more exact or really exact, we may have to adjust some settings, but the simple stuff that we're doing now, we really don't have to. We can just kind of drop it in and it should work pretty good. So we'll wait 33.21098 seconds. Hold on. All right, so the first thing that it did was it went and it sent out a bunch of tracking points, and then frame by frame it tracked those tracking points from frame to frame. then it figures out how all the points are moving. So stuff that's moving closer to the camera is going to move different than stuff that's moving further away from the camera. Once it has all that data, it creates what's called a 3D solved camera inside the scene. We can't see it yet, but now we have these points, okay? Now you can think of these points like those tracking points that we created ourselves, but After Effects did all the work for us. Now, you'll see a little bullseye. That bullseye is where it's thinking that all these things are kind of connected. If we get a crazy bullseye, and I don't know if I'll get it in this time. Yeah, like, oh, that's not really one. Like that one, okay? If I go here, it thinks that there's some relationship between that point that's way on that car and the one that's on this tree. It thinks there's a relationship there, but obviously there's not a relationship between that. Whereas over here, that seems like a pretty good relationship. It feels like that target is flat-ish to the ground. It's not perfect, but it's flat-ish, okay? So I'm going to right-click, and I'm going to go to Create Shadow Catcher, Camera, and Light. Now what that does is it creates three things, the shadow catcher, the camera, and the light. The shadow catcher will catch shadows, exactly what the name implies. If I wanted an item to look like there's shadows on the ground, that's what it's there for. It's a totally invisible item. I make something, the light's in there, and it casts shadows, and we can see those shadows. Now I'm going to right-click and do Create Text. There's my text. Now I'm going to hit R on the text. You could also open these up if you want to open them up and have extra windows. And I'm just going to rotate it. Because we're working in 3D, there's a red, green, blue, 3 different directions. This X one right now is the one that looks like I need to rotate to get it lined up. There it goes. Okay, now you can see there's a shadow there. I didn't have to do anything except for click that button, and it just worked. And then now if I were to zoom out and then hit play, you'll see that this text is now moving with the camera. It's moving with the scene. It does not seem like the shadow's lined up with the text. I may need to adjust that. Actually, let me see. No, it is. We're just seeing it at a weird angle. Or maybe not. That does look weird right there. All right, we'll fix that. Let's go to our shadow catcher. And maybe the shadow catcher needs to be lowered some. So I'm just going to lower this down. There we go. That's better. And it's kind of small. So let's hit S for scale and make that bigger. Now we can see it. Now we can also rotate this slightly to adjust that. Or wait, maybe this one is not rotated correctly. This might be up in the air a little bit. All right. No, you can use it for images too. The text is just the default like drop-in text. I'll show how we can add graphics to this as well. There we go. So that's good enough for our little demo, okay? So now as I click and drag through this, you can see that that text looks like it's pretty locked into that spot, okay? If I want to soften the shadows, I can double-click the light, go to Shadow Diffusion, click and drag, and then hit OK. Well, I should have done that a lot more because that's not very much. Let's pull it up a lot more. There we go. Now we can see it. There you go. So now the shadow is diffused. Cool. So now that works, and we can see the text. Now, your question was, can you add other stuff? Yes, you can. I need to go back to where I had all those points. I click back on my footage. I click back on the camera tracker, and that brings back all the points. Now I just need to grab another point to where I want to put something. So I'm going to go right about here, right-click, and I'm just going to create a null. Most of the time I'll create nulls and then just move stuff so they're connected to the nulls. Right now, here's the null. It's just a nothing object. I can scale it up, and you'll see there's nothing there. It's just that object. Oops. If I were to go and create something, and just for this, I'm just going to, there we go. Just going to go into a new composition. I'm just going to draw something real quick, and then we'll bring that in. There we go. And perfect. It's good enough for what you're going to need to see. I'm just going to drop this comp down into here. I'm going to make it 3D, which is that button. And then I'm going to take the position of the null, copy it, and paste it onto the position of comp 1. So I click null and hit P for position, click comp 1, P for position, and then I just do a copy from the null, paste to there, and now he's just sitting right there. And now when I go here, you can see, hey, it's moving like it. You might see a little delay, like as I move, you see the box doesn't move and then it does. I may need to move this up some. There we go. And I may need to make that shadow catcher bigger. Nope, it's right there. And this is one of those weird things about After Effects and how it does its stuff, where it's just not really showing us the shadow on that. And it might be floating for all we know. Okay, so I would have to tweak it, modify it, move it up and down, maybe pick a different point to get it to line up correctly. So let's go back here. I just use the null so that I have a placeholder. In case I change my stuff out, I have an easy way to copy and then paste where my stuff is at to move it around. Versus always creating a piece of text or always creating a solid. All right, I'm not sure where the shadow catcher is. If I really, really wanted to, I can go back to this, Right click and just say create shadow catcher here. And then scale it up. Maybe that's not casting a shadow. Let's go into Comp 1. Let's drop this down, drop materials down. Yep, it's not on cast shadow. There we go. So I just made a mistake, which never happens. Go to Comp 1. Move this arrow up. There we go. And now we have a shadow on there. Yes. Yep, I don't need the other shadow catcher, just the one. Subplate, yes. That's good. A couple other things I could play with on my shadow darkness. If I just want them to be lighter, I can go here. These are pretty dark shadows and they're pretty crisp, so I would not diffuse it that much. I would actually these pretty straight the way they are. And I would actually probably zoom out to find my light. 1920, 360, where are you at? All right, well, I don't see the light, but I'm just going to move it up and move it over. There we go. There. So just adjusting the position of the light, I can adjust where the shadows are hitting. Okay. Now, if I want to animate something, I can't just grab it and move it. Okay, so let's say that I want to take this and slide it down here. I'm going to hit P for position, go to the beginning, set a position keyframe, go to the end, and then just grab this and slide it down here, because you'll see that it's actually just like floating in air now. It might look like it's there, but obviously because of the shadow, it's no longer looking like it, and we lose the perspective. Sometimes you're lucky and you get this arrow would line up perfectly, but as I drag this, it looks like what's going to happen is it's actually going to go underneath that shadow catcher. And that's why the shadow is kind of like losing itself. Okay? So what I do for animation of this type of thing, let me delete my keyframes and start that over again, is I'm going to go back to my drone, back to my camera, find another point that's way down here. Let's say this one. Create another null. And then all I'm going to do is go to the beginning, set a position keyframe on the comp, that's where it was originally, go up here, copy this position, and paste that position. And then I might need to adjust it. It looks like it is definitely a little bit higher than it should be. Bring this back down. And maybe scoot it over some. And if you hold shift, it'll do it like a lot faster. There we go. Okay, so now as I click and drag, you can see now it looks like it's actually sliding down that road. And it's going behind the text. Look at that. Sweet. Okay, so that's tracking, camera tracking in After Effects. It's very limited. We don't get a whole lot of playtime. We can't modify stuff. We can't tweak stuff afterwards. We're kind of like stuck in whatever After Effects gives us in clicking these buttons. I had Nuke open, but apparently it closed. Now, in Nuke, we're going to bring the footage in, apply a camera tracker to it, and you'll see all the different options we get. After Effects is good for doing simple things. This is a simple thing. If I just need to add text, it's perfect. If I need fancier stuff, then I need fancier trackers. So I'm going to read my footage in, drone footage, hit open. I'm going to come down here and hit S. Oops, let me save this first. I'll call this number 2. And then I'm going to set up my project directory to be in camera tracking. There we go. Set my frame rate to 29.97. Set my full size format to 1280 by 720. And there we go. Cool. All right. So now everything should be set up. I'll save again. And I'm going to just add a camera tracker. Now here's where Nukes is better, initially at least, is better than After Effects. Over here, here's all the different settings we get for just the basic camera tracker stuff of what the camera is. So you can actually punch in, if you know the camera's lens, if you know the film back, if you know any information about the camera, you could punch it into here to get a more reliable, accurate solve. And that's what the ideal thing is, to get as accurate of a solve as you can. We can also do this where we would have a mask. So if I did have an item that was moving, I could put a mask on it and say, don't track this item. After Effects, I can't do that. After Effects will still track that item. So that's another great thing about this. We also have a range we could put in, and so on. I'm going to skip over to the settings, and I'm going to say Preview Features. You can see it? Yes. So what this is doing is it's showing me, just like After Effects was doing but we couldn't see it, it's showing me what it would track. So it's saying when you hit the track button, I'm going to put trackers here, 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 and all over the place and follow the movement of these points throughout this entire animation. If I want more, I go here and I put in 6,000. Boom, there we go. That's overkill. That's way too much. Probably 300 is a good number. That's what I used. That seemed to be a good track before. You'll see that it is trying to track stuff, in the sky. All right, what software am I in? There we go. 300 is good. I can also play with the detection threshold, which is controlling how picky it is about stuff. I can also play with the length of the track. There's a million settings in here. We're not going to get through all of them with this one, okay? So all I'm going to do is set this to 300. And that should be it for now. I'm going to hit track. So now it's going to go through, and then we get to see, as we're looking at this, I'm going to smooth this over, we can actually see as it's going through and tracking, here's all the points that it's tracking, and here's what they're doing. Again, something that we want to be able to see, because as we solve for this camera, we want to see if there's anything going crazy. If there's something that went askew inside of After Effects, we don't know until the very end. Here, something goes crazy, I hit cancel, and then I fix it, and then I start it up again. So this is also going to track twice. It's going to go through this entire thing. When it gets to the end, it's going to track backwards just to verify that the track is good. And then what we're going to do is we're going to get a ranking of, here's all these tracking points, here's how they moved, here's how accurate they are, and then you can eliminate ones that you don't want. So if I say, well, why are you tracking the sky? There's no contrast back there. I can delete all the ones from the sky and say, just don't track the sky. All right, here it is going backwards. If I get points that are kind of like wiggly and wobbling around, I can delete those points too. This is creating a collection of trackers to help solve for the entire camera. So if we delete them, it's not going to be like a horrible thing. If we're doing a planar track and we delete stuff, it might. If we're doing a 2D track and we delete stuff, well, now we don't have any data, right? So here we want to make sure that we get enough information, track it, and then we can go from there. And you'll see it is pretty quick. This is not solving it, this is simply just tracking it. And boom. All right, there we go. So now if we were to click and drag, we can see our tracks. And if I decide I don't want some, I can simply just grab them and then hit delete, and then they go away. So if I know I don't want the ones in the sky, I can just go anytime I see the ones in the sky and then delete them. Now, if I keep them there, there's a possibility that what Nuke's going to do is try to use those basically as ways to solve for the camera. And that information is just not good. Even information inside of a tree may not be very good because it might jump from branch to branch as it's moving along, just like you've seen it do when you're doing your own tracking. Okay, so I'm just kind of going throughout. It'll kind of clear itself out afterwards. Cool. So there's my track. I'm going to say solve. Now what it's going to do is it's going to take all these points, how these ones move far away, close to us, in the middle, on the right, on the left, and it's going to create an actual solve very similar to what we got in After Effects. So here's what it solved. As I click and drag, you can see it moving around. Now notice the coloration. We have some red ones, we have some green ones, and we have some yellow ones. Guess which ones are the bad ones? Red, right. So let's tell Nuke we don't want to use the red ones. Okay, and again, this is where Nuke is a better tracker because we can actually do that kind of thing. Under my auto tracks, here's a bunch of information. Here's the number of tracks that I have. Here's the track length minimum. And it actually gives me a little graph saying, hey, here's how often we have a track that goes from, frame to frame. Here is the average. Here is the max. Here's the minimum length, the solver error, and so on. I'm going to go down here to my max tracker error. Let me show you what the tracker error is. So my solver error is 0.98. So I'm going to take the max tracker error and put this to, let's say, 1.5. You'll notice a lot more of these got red. Basically, it's saying, okay, well, this is probably not a good track because there is a level of error on this. And then my max error altogether, I'll put to, let's say, 3. Okay? So I'm going to say delete rejected. Yes. I'm going to go back to my camera tracker. I'm going to say update track. Not update track, update solve. Hit OK. And then what this is going to do is all those points that I just eliminated, it's now going to use those points to solve for my camera, and hopefully we get a better solution. All right. So we'll see if this works. Okay, they are flickering in and out. That's fine. That seems to work there. Remember inside of After Effects when I tried to move something here, even though in the real world, well, I guess not in the real world because that ground is pretty screwed up, but in the real world, ideally, this would be a flat ground and we would be able to move it straight, okay? In Nuke, it's turning out the same way. That is not flat, all right? If I hit Tab, which you've done, I'm sure, already, look at what we get here. This is actually all of those points, and they're all color-coded based off of here's what it's actually tracking. Now you'll see that if we look at it from this angle, my ground is going like this, very similar to what After Effects did. It kind of ramped it up. Hit Tab again to get back. I'm going to grab some more points. Nope, not that one. I'm going to grab these ones here. And again, ideally, in a perfect world, these would all be actually flat. But unfortunately, the roads in Michigan are not like that. So we're just going to pretend that these are all flat. These are all flat. And that. All right. Not the tree one. I don't know if that's tree. No, it's not. Okay. All right. So I'm going to grab those. I'm going to right-click, go to ground plane, and I'm going to say set to selected. So what this is going to do is our ground is currently like this. It's going to say, okay, all those points are now flat. And so if I was to animate something there, it's going to think it's flat. There we go. So now if I hit Tab, spin around, you'll see that it's not perfect, but it definitely is a bit flatter than it was a few minutes ago. Okay? Cool. And if we zoom in here, all right, here's most of our clusters right there. There's those points that I just selected. There's the pink ones. And you'll see it's not perfectly flat. Some of these points are actually like above the ground, but it's pretty close. All right, hit Tab again. There we go. All right, so now I'm going to create a camera. So far in my node graph, that's all I have. My footage, my camera tracker. I'm going to hit Create Camera. Link output is very similar to not baked. Okay, if this is off, it's going to bake it. It'll be just the camera. With it on, it links it to, oops, delete that, to this footage. All right. So here's our footage, here's our camera tracker. This is no longer needed at the moment, okay? So that can just be like shuffled off to the side for now. This is what typically we would get, okay? And if we're passing this off to someone else, we would take the camera footage, export it out, give it to them, and they would be able to use it. Now, what I need to do is I want to test this out because I don't know if this is actually going to work. So I'm going to go into my camera tracker, hit Tab, and then go to what's called the model builder. You can create basic shapes inside of Nuke, cubes, planes, whatever else. but the model builder is where I can actually like build pieces of the scene in 3D. It's a pretty sweet tool. It basically is going to take the tracking data from the camera, the tracking or the model information from this, and put them together and actually line up these pieces of geometry, and you'll see why that's more beneficial than just having a solid over there. So model builder is right here. It has 4 inputs. Input number 1 is the source. That's my camera tracker. Input number 2 is my model builder, or is my camera. Sorry, there we go. And then what I'm going to do is just go in here. There's a grid. You can turn that off, I think, by hitting S and then turning grid off here. 3D, there it is, and grid position. Where's my grid? Oh, right here. Nope. Whatever, one of these buttons, that one. There we go. Now it's gone. Okay. Close that. Okay. So the model builder comes with these tabs on the left side in this area. I'm going to go to this tab here. It turns yellow. Everything's cool so far. And I'm going to create this lane right there. So I'm just going to create this plane. Click and drag, one motion. And then I'm going to line up the points. Click here, drag this to about there. Click here, drag this to about there. Click here, drag this to about there. And click here and drag this to what seems like it would work. Okay. The curb curves a little bit there, so I had to, kind of scoot it over a little bit and adjust. All right. Now I should have done this at frame 1, but it's fine. It'll still work. I'm going to go backwards now. You'll see that it's not lined up. All I'm going to do now is just click and drag this point and watch what it does. It slides it in perspective to right there. So now I just set basically 2 keyframes. It creates this piece of geometry that is now locked to that area. Okay? Yes, sir.
So on that wireframe, would you be able to say those left and right points in the middle, be able to say if the road was bent more curvature?
Yes, you can get into a whole bunch of stuff here. No, not there, sorry. Down stuff in here where you can actually use this as modeling tools, which is what I'm going to do. I created this small section. I need the rest of the road. So I'm going to go to right click and say mode edit. I'm going to go to my edges, so right click again. And I'm just going to click on this, this, and this. Right click again and say extrude. And what this is going to allow me to do is grab the green. It's incredibly difficult to select, but I can do it. And I drag it, and you'll see this goes pretty close to where the road is. I'll have to adjust it a little bit. Just scoot that over. Hold control, maybe a little bit of rotation here. There we go. And then scoot that up. All right. So now if I go back, I can kind of line this up and say, hey, that matches pretty good, right? Sweet. So here's our nodes so far. Again, I like to show them because this is all we've created. 3 nodes, our camera tracker, our camera, and our model builder. Now this is where it'll get a little bit confusing, but once it's set up, it works pretty good, okay? What we're going to do is we're going to take this frame here. This is frame number 1, and I'm going to take frame number 1 and project that picture of frame number 1 on that piece of geometry. Now the reason I do that is because let's say that I wanted to change the lines in the road. Once I have that projection, I can take this first image into Photoshop, make it look like whatever I want, come back in here, and it'll be whatever I've set it up to be, okay? So for this, I need a project 3D. Okay, now this wants the camera, labeled it camera obviously, and then this wants to know what to project. So we're projecting this piece of footage, okay? Now, what am I projecting it onto? I need the actual card. So I'm going to jump into my model builder here and say bake the geometry. That gives me a piece of geometry, and it automatically connected it because I had it selected. Okay, so now if I go into close all this, hit tab. No. Come on. Oh, I'm not viewing it, that's why. Let me view my card. There we go. Now we can see that the road is actually projected onto that piece of geometry. So let's just go into Photoshop real quick. I'm going to bring in that first image, I'm going to change some stuff on it, and then I'll bring it back in, and you'll see how I'm able to take that image and make it look like whatever I want. If I wanted there to be a hole in the ground, like a sewer, and then have stuff happen there, I can make it a hole in the ground and have stuff happen or whatever. There we go. Let's go to open. Let's find our stuff. It's somewhere in here and there. 2560. Camera. Footage from AE. Here's frame number 1. All right. So whatever I want to do to this, I can do to this. So just for, I guess, the ease of this, let's go into there we go. I'm just going to grab this and just use that right there on my road. Copy it, paste this, scale it down. I would do something, stupid Photoshop. I would do something fancier, but for now, just for demonstration, I'm just going to drag this, rotate it here, hold down my control key, just line up the perspective. Good enough for our demonstration. Perfect. All right. So I'm going to turn this off. I'm going to save it all. And this will be called Still from Photoshop. I don't need layers. And I will save this as a ping so I get transparency, maybe. Yes. Yes. All right. So let's jump back to this. Let's read in my Still from Photoshop image. There's my Still from Photoshop. I need to pre-multiply it. There we go. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to switch images. So instead of using this image from my stuff here, I'm going to use my new image. And then now if I look at my card, there it is. Now I have that image projected onto that card. Now I need to combine everything together, okay? If you've had 3D before, this next thing will at least sound somewhat familiar. We need to render out this. This is a 3D scene that we're creating here. That has to be rendered out, but we do it all within Nuke. So I'm going to add a scanline render. The scanline render needs a camera, so I again grab my camera. It needs a background. So I'm going to connect this to my background. And then it needs, it's hard to see, but it needs a scene, which is what this is. Because I have the one item, I think I can just do that, and that would work. And now if I view the scanline render, I hit Tab, boom, there it is. And now we see, there it is on my street, just like I had in Photoshop. Exactly like that, okay? Now, we will notice something when I hit play, it's not going to work correctly. Okay? What's happening is that footage is now moving along with it. So we have to fix this. And this is, your node graph does get crazy at this point, right? You'll see there's like stuff all over the place. We'll just set this here, set that there. I'll hit Control and just drag this here. There we go. I'll straighten that up later. So this Project 3D is taking the camera's movement and projecting it onto that plane. Because the camera's moving, everything is moving. So I'm going to add a frame hold right here. So between the camera and this Project 3D, I'm going to say hold frame 0, don't move. And so now when I rewind this and hit play, there we go. Now that thing is moving exactly with it. It's locked into that position. Now again, one of the cool things about this, let's go back and see, it's right there. We can jump into Photoshop, change stuff, whatever. I'm going to delete this stuff because I really don't want that on there. I'm going to reuse this piece of footage again. Again, we're crossing these lines, and it's kind of unavoidable with this assignment. Just as a huge mess. There we go. All right, so as I click and drag here, you'll see that I don't have a still image I'm feeding into it anymore. Okay, my footage is updating the image it's projecting every single frame, just like the camera was updating every single frame. So I'm going to copy the frame hold, paste it here, and now that thing is locked. There we go. Perfect. All right. So now here's what's cool about this is that if I go into actual like 3D inside Nuke, let me unlock my camera. I can hold down Alt, left mouse button, middle mouse button, and right mouse button with the Alt clicked to actually see this. So now I have this where I can go in here and say, hey, here's, it's stretched out, but here's that sewer. So if I wanted to add, let's say, smoke to this and I wanted to have it move with it, I could go and grab an image or a video of smoke, send it into Nuke, put a card right there on that spot, and it'll actually like come up from that spot. Or anything, right? Another cool thing we can do with this is I can take, I'm going to create a scene node. Typically when you have more than one item, like this is only one item, we put everything into a scene node, like so. And then the scene node would go into the scanline render. My camera would also go into that scene node, okay? So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go to Right, Geometry, and I'm going to save this out. So I'm going to call this cam-from-nuke.fbx, and just so I don't screw up my other stuff, I'll call it 002 or 1. And I'm calling it FBX, and FBX is basically a format that allows me to take a 3D item from software to software, okay? So I'm going to take out my cameras, my geometry, cameras, lights, axes, and point clouds, and say execute wherever that execute went, right there. And then say OK. So now this is what I can do with this. If I go into a 3D software, give it a second. Nope, no crashing. No crashing. There we go. And I just ruined it, so let me just undo that. Maybe I can just, there we go. Here it is, right? So here's the camera from Nuke. Here's a light inside my 3D scene. Here's that plane from the ground. And then this is all actual 3D geometry. So if I created a dinosaur and I wanted him to run down the street, there it is. I can have him run down the street. And you'll see all these things line up like perfectly. Right. And here we go. Look, there's these cubes. They have, just like After Effects has that shadow catcher, inside Maya I added this shadow catcher that allows these cubes to have their shadows sitting on the ground. I would be able to basically go into here, create this, render it out, bring that back into Nuke, and use this with other scenes. Pretty cool. The way that it gets set up is I go to Import. I find my camera scene. I'm not sure why I'm in that file. There. 2560, camera tracking. There it is, cam from Nuke. All right, there's my camera, there's my plane. If I need these to be bigger because it's like crazy small, I just group both of those items together and make them bigger. Now, if you've never had 3D, I'm not expecting you to go to 3D. I'm not expecting anyone to go into 3D, but I just want you to see it, because if I did have something that wanted to be in there, that's where I would have to be going to. I'm going to go into this camera. I'm going to go to the attribute editor in here. I'm going to go to image plane, which is environment, create an image plane, find my footage. I know it's so many steps. Oops. Drone from AE, there it is. I say use image sequence. Cool. All right, so now I have the image sequence in here. It will not line up. Okay, you can see it's kind of like shifting and going side to side. My frame rate from Nuke is not the same frame rate in Maya. So I go to my settings dude at the bottom. I go to my settings here, and I pick 2997, hit save, and now it lines up perfectly. And then whatever I want to do to that, I just do it, and then I can render it out and send it over. I also have this, where you can go into Cinema 4D. And again, I'm showing these because they're important to see that this camera tracking is implemented all over the place, and we want to be able to do all these different things with it. I go to motion tracker. I'm not going to track it in here because Cinema 4D is pretty long and how long it takes to track. We load the footage. It takes a minute to load. I'm not 100% comfortable with these settings. I literally just did it the other day just for this. 2D tracking, you create auto tracks. Once that's done, you go back to your 3D solve and you would say solve, and then it would run the solve. Eventually you would be able to get something like this. Ignore that blob. Scene mesh. There we go. Eventually you get something like this, very similar again to what we had inside of Nuke, very similar to what we had inside of After Effects. Now, one thing that Cinema has that Nuke doesn't have, and another thing that Cinema has that Maya doesn't have, is the ability to take this tracking data and create a mesh off of it. And that's what you were just seeing a second ago. It'll actually create a point cloud. Jump out of my camera. Okay, so there's the point cloud like we saw inside of Nuke. And then it'll actually create a mesh on top of that point cloud. That's what we're seeing here. That's the mesh that's on top of it. It's not 100% accurate, obviously. And a lot of this has to do with it's grass. It's not going to be able to create individual blades of grass.
So it makes like a 3D environment from the picture?
Correct. From the video, right? It's not just from a picture. It has to be from a video. Now, where that comes in, Cinema 4D camera tracker. They have a clip that they've used that is a lot better to use with that. So what I want you to do for these assignments is I want you to track it in After Effects, and I want you to put something in there. I want you to have a still and an animation. In Nuke, I want you to do the same thing. Have a still image and have an animation. For the animation part of that, inside here, if I get closer to that scene, I can do it. Way over here is 3D stuff. Here's geometry. Any one of these items, that's a piece of geometry, these top three, I can create. There's also a sphere here. I don't think there's a cylinder, no. So I can go to create, let's say, a cube. And then using my hotkeys, Control is rotate, Control Shift is scale. And I can scale this down, let go, move this into the scene. There it is. And then I'm just going to click on the beginning of this. There it is. Set a keyframe here. Go further up. And then, oops. Just move this so that it's still on that ground. There we go. And so now if I rewind this, you see it slides along the ground. I need to connect it into the scene. View my scan line, hit the tab key, close the stuff, and there it is. Now it's black because it doesn't have a texture on it, which is where this image would come in. So if I were to just put a color bars or a constant or an image that I found, now it would have color bars. We're not getting into shadows and lights inside Nuke. It's a different beast. We won't be there. We'll get there eventually, just not yet, okay? So there's my stuff. So there's an animation, and then for that still, I would replace that road or whatever it is that I found there with it. Okay? It seems like a pretty easy node graph once you get the thing organized. But realistically, it's just a few parts that are really tricky. This project 3D, just making sure you have the holds in the right spot. And then making sure everything pipes into a scene, and then making sure the scene goes into a scan line. Cool. All right, questions yet? No? All right.